meeting. So we are recording this meeting tonight so that people can view it online who weren't able to attend tonight. So that will be available soon after this community consultation meeting is completed. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, parts of it by the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands, and is within the territory of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. So this is just an agenda for tonight. It's pretty basic. We've got some introductions, which I'm going to do. We have presentations. We basically have two presentations. So one presentation will be done by me, and then another one will be done by the applicant. So I'm going to turn over the presentation over to the applicant, and they'll present their proposal to you guys. Then we'll have a questions and comments section. I'm going to, before we just get into that, the questions and comments, I'm going to tell you guys how you can participate. So I'll give you guys instructions on that. But for now, just sit back and just listen to the presentations and absorb the material. And then we'll talk briefly about next steps. So for introductions, I'm George Fantes, city planner. And with me, I have Colin Wolf, who is a planner with the City of Toronto, and he's helping me to facilitate this meeting. And we also have Avanathi Ganesharaja from Urban Design, and she's also here with me tonight. We also have the applicant here with us, and they are Jane Mcfarlane from Weston Consulting, so she's the planner for the applicant. We have James Janzer from BNKC Architects, so he's the architect. We have Andrew Pruce from ERA Architects, Inc., who I believe would be representing the heritage piece on this site. And then we also have Tony Chu from LEA Consulting, who is the transportation consultant for the applicant. And then also with us tonight, we have the counselor, and his staff are also attending this meeting. So, counselor, I see you're on our panelist list, so you can unmute yourself if you like. And at this time, I'd like to just invite you to say a few words.
Thanks very much, George. You hear me okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. Good evening, everyone. This is a little bit different to have a planning meeting online and not in the basement of Hope United Church. So it's good to be with you, and I'm glad we're finding ways to connect and get back together, despite taking a few months where we've been apart. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know this is a new way of doing it, but I'd love to hear your feedback on the process and any suggestions on how we can improve the engagement. And that's because really, I always believe having your input is really critical into the success of these projects. You play such an important role in shaping our neighborhood and how the East End is evolving. And there's no doubt that Danforth is going to change. We know that. I'm sure many of you who have taken the time to tune in tonight probably also were involved in all of the work that's gone on in our community over the past number of years. This site, as I understand it, and George will talk about that, but it's part of both the Danforth Avenue and the Main Street planning studies, which were reviews of Danforth between Vic Park all the way over to Coxwell, and then the Main Street planning boundary around the main TTC station and Danforth Go. So those were big planning lifts, studies and consultations that we've done over the past few years. And these areas were identified as places for growth and development opportunities, a combination of mid-rise as well as some taller buildings, new public road networks, new parks, new community services and facilities to support that growth. And again, if you were involved, I'm sure you remember all of those conversations. When we look at this site right now, it's a three two-story buildings. And hopefully redevelopment that takes place here, it'll be something that helps us build out our community objectives, and something that we'll hear more about from George and the applicant directly. I've had the opportunity to work with George Pentazis from City Planning on a number of development applications. He's got a great sense of what's going on here in the East End. He was involved in those studies I was talking about earlier. So we are in good hands with George. And he really, I think that staff do a good job of understanding our concerns and making sure that your feedback is incorporated into anything that's moving forward. So on my end, I've been working hard to bring investment and improvement to this part of Danforth. Those conversations about community centers and park space, public realm, sidewalks, access to transit, all of that stuff is going on right now. And that hasn't stopped because of COVID. We are very much engaged and seized with those issues, as well as capacity around schools. That's always a challenge, and how we address congestion and get people moving in this area. Lastly, I'll just say we're seeing a lot of change in the East End overall. And while it's, more positive than not, change is always hard, and these are important discussions to have. So this is the first time that probably many of us are actually meeting the developer and their team. It's the first time for me. And this really marks the start of a process. And I think that they should know the expectations from me and from the community will be high for them to respond to our priorities here in the East End. So there's a huge need for new housing. I'm interested to hear tonight about any plans applicants have for affordable units integrated into this project. And how their vision to improve Danforth East as a place to live, work, and then I also want to note that there's 3 rental units on the site. So I'd like to hear about how the applicant is engaging with tenants in those units and making sure that they have a fair process through all of this as well. And so then at the end, we will have an opportunity to get your feedback. You can reach out to my office. Both Rishab and Claudine are on the line as well, taking notes. And again, we'll work very closely with staff as we go through all of this. So that's it for me, George. Thanks for having us on, bringing everyone together, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Councillor. So to start, the purpose of this meeting, which the Councillor sort of touched on, is to present the application to you guys and give you an overview of the planning process and policies that apply to this application. So we're also here to hear your comments and answer any questions that you guys might have. So, but it's important to know that this meeting isn't where we make a decision. So no decision is going to be made at this meeting. So if you have a comment that you want to share with me after this meeting, after you've sort of absorbed this material, you're more than welcome to email me with your comments, and then that gets added to the public record, and then that's something that I can be aware of as I review the application. So to start, we're going to go through the planning process very briefly here. So this is the process that every application to rezone lands goes through. This slide, which shows the process, can be, a bit complicated. There's a lot of moving parts here. So I'm going to break it down to you guys to really the bare essentials here. And this is really what it is. And so essentially the process begins with the city receiving a development application that includes plans and various consultant studies, such as studies for transportation and engineering impacts. Then the application is then circulated and reviewed by city staff and various other agencies, right? So our engineering staff, urban design staff, heritage staff, the TTC and the school boards, etc. During this review, city planning writes a preliminary report, which we did for this application. And the report just introduces the project to Toronto and East York Community Council. And that went to Toronto and East York Community Council in June 2020. Then we also hold a community consultation meeting, which is, this is where we are at right now with this application. And then following that, the applicant will essentially take all the comments they've gotten from the city and from you guys, and they'll revise their application to resolve those outstanding issues. And so this resubmission is then recirculated and is further reviewed. And this process could happen several times over until those issues are satisfactory and the application now represents good planning. And at that point, that's when the city submits a final report to Toronto and East York Community Council, which gets considered and adopted. And that report then goes to City Council for the final adoption, and then the application would be approved. So here is just this is just a slide of just how do I determine the public interest, right? So this is really comes down to what my job is, right? So and it breaks down to 4 baskets here that goes into the review of a development application, and they include the facts and figures of the application, which you see on the top here. So this is all the plans and studies of the proposal and the surrounding context. Then there's the planning policies. So this includes various plans and policies from the province and the official plan, which we're going to talk about further into this presentation. And then we also have various laws that come into play. So this includes bylaws, zoning bylaws, and decisions made by council. And then we also have people. So it could include the applicant, various city departments, and the local community, right? So you guys. So the key takeaway here is that development applications go through a public review process involving experts in their fields and the community, culminating in a report to council that makes recommendations. And then council would make that final decision. So now moving on to the site context. So this is the site itself. It's at 2720 to 2734 Danforth Avenue. It's a little over 1,200 square meters, and there's basically 3 existing 2-story commercial buildings on the site. Commercial mixed-use buildings, so there's also residential. And these buildings front on Danforth Avenue, and then there's also a public laneway to the rear of the site. So this is the existing and planned context. And this is just an aerial view of the area. And we're just going to populate it here step by step. So here you've got your various roads. You have Danforth Avenue, Dawes, Guest, Coleman, Barrington, and Main that just sort of surround the area. This orange star is where the application is located. So close to it, you have Coleman Park. You also have the TTC Main Street Station. Further south from the TTC Main Street Station, you also have the Danforth GO Station. So really good transit here. Throughout Danforth, you have this Danforth Avenue Planning Study overlay, and I'm going to talk about what that means when we talk about policies. And then you also have this other overlay, which is the Main Street Planning Study. And again, I'm going to talk about both of these studies and what they mean for the application. So the key takeaway here is that the application has frontage on Danforth Avenue and is in proximity of the main TTC station. The application falls within Danforth Avenue Planning Study and the Main Street Planning Study. So getting into the planning policies, we really start at the top, and that's with the province, right? So the province has plans and policies that they're mainly two documents here, right? So one is the provincial policy statement, and another one is Place to Grow, or what we usually call the growth plan. And essentially what these documents do is set out where and how we should grow as a province. So in terms of where the province wants us to grow and intensify an urban growth center, so this would be like downtown or Yonge and Eglinton, transit corridors and station areas. I've bolded this one because I think this is the one that would apply to us, right? We're on a transit corridor and we're close to the station. And then there's also areas where infrastructure is underutilized. And then how to grow is by complete communities, which means a mix of uses. So that includes residential and non-residential uses. And it also means having easy access to, various uses that allow for living and working and playing, in a very close proximity areas, and providing a full range of housing that can take different shapes and forms. So moving now from the province, we're coming down now to to the city, right? So now this is a map, the urban structure map from the city's official plan, and so the city's official plan has policies on how the city of Toronto should grow. So these policies in the official plan are required by law to be consistent and conform to the policies from the province. The map you see on this slide, like I said, is the urban structure map, and it tells us where the city is targeting growth. So growth can be targeted at the downtown and central waterfront. So that's this orange area. It can also be targeted in these centers, which these are the sort of the red areas you see here. So these are our civic centers. And then this one is our Yonge and Eglinton. And then the blue areas are our employment districts, and that's where we basically have employment growth. And then these brown lines are avenues, and avenues usually follow transit corridors, and it's where we do expect growth to occur there, but we expect that growth to be mid-rise buildings, mainly because if you can see here, you see a lot of this beige color, and that beige color is usually low-rise neighborhoods. So mid-rise buildings are one of the built forms that can be quite compatible with low-rise neighborhoods if they're massed appropriately. So just to zoom into here, you can see here that you have Danforth. The yellow star here is where the application is, and it's within that avenue overlay. So the official plan also has a land use map, and this is showing an excerpt of that land use map. And so the entire city has its own land use designation, and those land use designations provide criteria on what is expected for new development. So the proposal is on land that is designated mixed use. You can see the proposal here in the yellow star, and so the red is mixed use areas. So what that means is that mixed use areas allow for a broad range of land uses and a variety of development forms. So and then you also have other land use designations surrounding that. So the yellow here to the north is neighborhoods where we expect the low-rise development could occur. That's where we have our low-rise residential. And then the green here is basically our city parks. Those are our public parks, and they're usually just our parkland. This little sort of, I guess, orangey color here is apartment neighborhoods. So they're kind of like neighborhoods in the sense that they're mainly residential, but they're more for apartment buildings. So if you guys are familiar with this area, and I'm assuming that you are, this is where you have the new Trent buildings that on this west side of Trent. And then this gray area down here to the south is basically just a utility corridor. It's the transit corridor for the Danforth Go. So here we've got the Danforth Avenue study. So this is a study that basically goes through the avenue for Danforth, and it goes from Coxwell to Victoria Park. And what this policy did, it's an official plan policy that's specific to this area. And it was approved in July 2018 by City Council. And what it basically achieves is incremental growth along Danforth Avenue in the form of mid-rise buildings. So that's about 24 to 27 meters in height. And it does allow for buildings that go higher than that, so about 33 meters, or that's roughly around 10 stories. And it would allow for that in exchange for basically a floor of non-residential space, so like an office space or something. And that would be located typically on the second floor, and then you'd have active uses on the ground floor, like a retail. And then you could have residential on the remaining 8 floors. And so the idea behind that was to really incentivize as much non-residential uses here as possible, because again, going back to the province's idea for growth, we wanted to have a mix of both residential and non-residential where it made sense. So here we've also got the Main Street planning study. So this was the other layer. And it's another official plan policy that's specific to this area that you see here and that's outlined. And we did this study mainly because we were seeing a lot of interest in these areas, especially around Dawes Road. Some of you may be familiar with the 286 Main Street application, which was approved by the LPAT by settlement. And then we also have two transit stations here with Danforth Go and Main TTC station. So there's a lot of interest in this area, and really want to try to create a policy to get ahead of that. And so the policy, which it's known as OPA 478 or Official Plan Amendment 478, was approved by City Council on December 19, 2019. So almost a year ago. That policy has been appealed to the LPAT. So the LPAT is the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. And so the policies aren't in full force and effect quite yet. Because basically the City Council's decision has been appealed. So what's going to happen is that we're still going to use those policies. Those policies still, because they were approved by City Council, they still represent Council's vision for the area, but they aren't quite set in stone just yet until basically we have a decision from the LPAT. And then the idea behind OPA 478 was basically to contemplate intensification in the form of both mid-rise and tall buildings in appropriate locations. So when we talk about tall buildings, we really mean it in this area around Dawes Road, where the sites are larger, and you also have a context of tall buildings with Main Square. But along Danforth, this policy really just recognizes what Danforth does, and so it would maintain the mid-rise form along Danforth, which we agree is good planning, and that's what we brought forward. So the city also has a zoning bylaw, and what the zoning bylaw does, it sets out various technical standards for buildings, including maximum heights, densities, setback requirements, so how close a building could be to a property, parking and loading spaces, and indoor and outdoor amenity space requirements. So for this property, it's zone CR, which is commercial residential. And that allows for a variety of residential and non-residential uses, retail, restaurants, offices, institutional, and community services. And for this specific site, the zoning bylaw currently just allows for a building to a maximum height of 14 meters and permits a density of 3 times the area of the lot. And this is really the final one of all the planning policies and tools that we would consider when we're reviewing an application. And this is the Danforth Avenue Urban Design Guidelines. So the guidelines, they don't have legislative authority to them. So they don't carry the same weight as, say, a policy would in an official plan. So what guidelines do is that they help guide how built forms should look and be masked in order to achieve those official plan policies. So a good example of this is on the right here with this section drawing of this mid-rise building. And so one of the policies in the official plan, for example, says that you should be transitioning appropriately to properties that are designated neighborhoods, right? So that yellow that we saw on the land use map. And so one of the ways that the urban design guidelines interprets and would apply that policy is if there is an angular plane that's being met. So that's one way to achieve that policy. And that's really what guidelines are used for. And they're a helpful tool for city planning. They're a helpful tool for residents and for developers. So the key takeaway here is provincial and municipal policies both speak to intensifying near existing transit. Policies also speak to new development, providing a mix of uses and fitting within its context through appropriate massing that limits adverse impacts. So the applicant's proposal, I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'm going to be very brief about it because the applicant, when they do their presentation, they can go into more detail about it. But here's some highlights of the application. So you have, it's a 9-story mixed-use building. It's about 27.8 meters. It's 81 residential units, 256 square meters of non-residential space, 1 level of underground parking, 27 vehicle parking spaces, 82 bike parking spaces, 172 indoor amenity space, and 152 outdoor amenity space. And there's also heritage conservation. So you see this building here, it was identified as having heritage potential. So the applicant is making an attempt to conserve that heritage building. So here are just some plans. Here's a site plan. So this just shows the site itself. Onto this, to the bottom of the screen here, you'll see Danforth Avenue, and you'll see the various entrances into the building. So you have a residential entrance and 2 retail entrances, and then you can see the various setbacks and step backs of the massing of the building itself. And then here's just a couple of elevations. So this is showing the building in the south, which is the front elevations. And so this is what you would be looking at from Danforth. And then north, this is the rear elevation. So this is behind. And you can see this is where the access for the for trucks and parking would be. So that would be from the laneway. Then here is just a side elevations from both the west and east elevations. So I'm happy to go back to these when we get in the Q&A if you guys have any questions or comments on them. So reasons for the application and any issues. So the application that's submitted is called a rezoning application. So what that means is that the landowner is seeking to rezone the lands to allow for their development. And it's then the city's job to figure out if that development proposal is appropriate. So as we looked at before, the zoning bylaw permits a building of 14 meters in height and 3 times the area of the lot. That's what's permitted right now. And so the application proposes to increase that height and density to basically 27.8 meters for the height and 4.37 times the area of the lot. So so the application seeks to amend or change this portion of the zoning bylaw, what's there now, to allow for this. And like I said, it's my job to figure out if that's appropriate with your guys' help. So some of the issues that would need to be addressed and that I've just listed out here, and this is not an exhaustive list. So if you guys see something on here that maybe we may have missed, feel free to tell us about it. But basically, it's consistency and conformity with the provincial policies and plans, conformity with the official plan and those policies in the official plan, making sure that there's an appropriate built form, building height and massing, so that we can avoid impacts to light view, privacy, and any wind impacts. An appropriate public realm enhancement. So public realm is, our streets, right? So the sidewalk, for example, making sure that's wide and landscaped appropriately. Unit mix, so creating family-oriented buildings. We're really trying to push for not just 1-bedroom units, but 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units. We also have heritage conservation, and we're also looking at the impact to hard and soft infrastructure. So hard infrastructure being your sewer pipes and the like, and the soft infrastructure being schools, daycares, that sort of thing. And we're also looking at the impact caused to parking, loading, and the overall transportation impact. So that is it from me on my presentations. From me and my presentation, I have a couple of other slides that I'm going to share with you after when we get to the Q&A, and that's when we'll talk about how you guys can participate. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing, and Jane, I am going to give you the presenter role, and then you'll be able to present. Okay, Jane, so you should have the ability to share your screen.
You're on mute, Jane.
Thank you for unmuting me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Great. And can you confirm that you can see my presentation on the shared screen?
Yes, yep, that's good as
Perfect. Well. Fabulous. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jane Mcfarlane. I'm an associate planner with Weston Consulting, who is the planning consultant on behalf of the owners of this property. And we prepared and submitted the zoning bylaw amendment application for the subject property. The subject lands, I think we all know where they're located and have been referenced tonight, do consist of three separate parcels, 2720, 2726, and 2734. They are three different separate parcels, each with their own area and frontage, but cumulatively it equals just over 1,250 square meters and a frontage of approximately 29 meters on the north side of Danforth Avenue. Currently, each of the lots contain a two-story mixed-use building, as we can definitely see, and as many of you know, because I'm sure most of the attendees or participants tonight are from the immediate area. We've got the furniture store at 2720 and 2726, and then a convenience retail store at 2734 with residential units on top, and I believe there's also office uses on the second floor of some of these buildings. So similar to George, my job is when we're coming up with a development application to look at what's appropriate at this site. And similar to what cities planners do, we also look at a detailed review in terms of where the site is, where it's situated in the city, and what's around it. So we look at the existing built form as we've done and showed in this map, which is what everyone knows to be there today. And we've looked at the heights and the densities, the uses, et cetera, that are adjacent to the property, but also within, you know, usually a 500 to 800 meter radius of the subject property. This site or this slide just shows some of the photos that we all observe when we're walking around the vicinity of the subject property. On west of the site, on the north side of Danforth Avenue, you have a very consistent 2 and sometimes 3-story built form with largely commercial uses at grade and residential and office uses above. To the south of the subject property, which is the photo to at the top left of my screen here, you see Guest Avenue and the Canadian Tire store. The photo at the bottom of my screen is taken along Coleman Avenue. It's looking in the sort of southern direction, which is the alleyway connection off of Coleman that loops into the rear behind the subject property. And then the bottom photo at the right-hand side is also another shot along Danforth, where you see the 3-story but predominantly 2-story built form that's along Danforth. So we also look at what services are in the vicinity of the subject property as well. And this is a bit of a context map that we undertook that's part of my planning report, where we reviewed all the schools, places of worship, pharmacies, grocery stores, other services like banks and credit unions, recreational facilities, and parks and other trails or other green spaces. As well, you can see in the center, we've got the subject property outlined in red. But what we've also done here is outlined 2 radiuses from the subject property at 400 meters. If anyone can see my cursor just circling around, and 800 meters. And that really gives us a good sense of what's within an ideal 5 to 10 minute walk from the subject property. Now, in addition to looking at what the current built form, that context looks like, it's also very important that we look at development activity, certainly when we're coming up with some of our matrices and our background knowledge into what we're proposing at the site. And as everyone likely knows, there is a lot of development that's happening in the vicinity of the subject property. To the southeast, on the east side of Dawes Road at 9 to 25 Dawes, there's an application, a zoning bylaw amendment application for 2 stories two towers. The one at the north tower is 24 stories proposed, and the southern tower is 30 stories, an overall density of 9.2 FSI, approximately 45,000 square meters proposed at that site. And then across the street on Dawes Road, still south of Danforth, is an application at 10 and 30 Dawes Road for also two other residential towers that are connected by a podium. The tower heights at this point are 26 stories and 33 stories, which would accommodate a total of 539 units and a density of 11.37 FSI. Now, just to the south of that at 6 Dawes Road, right just to the north of the rail corridor, are 3 new mixed-use towers ranging in the height of 40, 46, and 49 stories with an FSI of 9.37 and just about 123,000 square meters in terms of new floor area at that site. Across the street, on the west side of Main Street, is the application that actually George mentioned earlier, which was OMB approved in, I believe, 2017 at 276 and 294 Main Street. That's municipal address. For one new building at 30 stories, 93 meters, which is to be a mixed-use building at that site. Now, also within that block, I've pointed out here is 2575 Danforth Avenue. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner is a rendering. That's the main square redevelopment where 2 new infill towers were proposed on that site. Currently, that block or that main square already has and accommodates some tall towers on the property, and the infill, which is what was proposed there. So to sort of summarize this block that's on the south side of south side of Danforth, between Main and Dawes Road, is slated for some very tall buildings to come in. I'm sure everyone's very familiar with those in terms of previous consultations that have been occurring and in light of some of the planning reviews that have come forward with the development pressure that block has created with the city. So there's also a couple more applications applications and approvals, I should say, along Danforth Avenue that we've highlighted here to the west of the subject property. At 2494 Danforth Avenue, there's a 10-story mixed-use building proposed, which also contains a 4-story rental and retail portion. To the further west of that, at a municipal address 2359 Danforth Avenue, there's an approved 10-story mixed-use building, which has a density of 4.27 FSI. 136 dwelling units are proposed and about 9,600 square meters at that site. To the west of that, at 2315 Danforth, you also have another approved 8-story mixed-use building with a density of 4.7 FSI, just over 12,000 square meters, and approximately 170 units. And then finally, at the northeast corner of Woodbine Avenue and Danforth, there's an application for a 15-story building that has quite recently come in on that corner. So we take all that intel in terms of what's being proposed and what's certainly been approved, especially along the Danforth Strip, in terms of our background review, and it feeds into really how we come up with a proposed concept for the subject property that we think is appropriate and compatible in this neighborhood. Obviously recognizing that various sites have different features and attributes and different adjacencies. So we take all those neighborhood and site-specific complexities into our analysis. And furthermore, recognizing, for instance, in this case, that a lot of the tall buildings that are proposed to the south of us, of the subject property, especially along Dawes Road, they may either have a different official plan designation, especially in light of what George referenced to earlier when he was pointing out the difference in the apartment neighborhoods designations versus the mixed use. But we also are looking at some of the lot areas and the adjacent uses on some of those tall towers. So for instance, what I'm trying to say is that just because there are tall towers proposed or in existence, it doesn't automatically mean that every adjacent site or every nearby site is appropriate for a tall building. In this case, as you've heard, we're proposing a mid-rise building, which is a mid-rise mixed-use building at 9 stories. We feel that's a more appropriate height and scale for the subject property. We also look at the TTC, which we all know is very well serviced in this area. The subject property is about 400 meters, walking distance to Main Street Station, just over a kilometer to Victoria Park to the east, and as well a good walking distance, about a 5-minute, 10-minute walk at most to the Danforth GO station. And there's many buses that run both along Danforth and from Main Street Station, which serve other areas of the city. So the next thing that we as planners also look at is definitely the planning framework. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because George did a very good job of detailing the planning framework in the City of Toronto and in the province, and how that works from the higher and at the provincial level down to the nitty-gritty in terms of the zoning bylaw and the urban design guidelines. So I will just jump to the section in our presentation tonight about the proposed development. Very high level, what we're proposing here, as I've said, and as George said earlier tonight, it's a 9-story mixed-use building. At this point, we are proposing to accommodate 81 rental units. The building has a metric height of just over 27 meters. Total gross floor area is 5,531 square meters, and that's broken down into the majority of the building being residential floor area and just over 250 square meters of commercial area. We're proposing a total FSI on the property of 4.37. We have proposed 27 parking spaces, which are all below grade, and that does include 1 car share space. We're proposing 82 bicycle parking spaces. The majority of those, especially for the future residents, will be secured on the ground floor within the building. And of the 81 rental units, we're proposing 26 be bachelor or studio, 38 are 1-bedroom units, 10 are 2-bedroom units, and 7 are 3-bedroom units. And in terms of percentage of the building, I'll break that out. Of the bachelor units, it would be about 32% of the entire building. The 1-bedroom units comprises 47%. The 2-bedroom units comprise 12%, and the 3-bedroom units do comprise just about 9% of the building. We also are proposing 1 type G loading space that's at the back of the lot and at the back of the building, as well as indoor and outdoor amenity space. And as I get to detailing some of the plans later in this presentation, I'll show and highlight for all the participants here where all those spaces are. So this slide shows our proposed two renderings of the proposed development. I'm going to now ask our architect, James, from BNKC Architects, to come and speak to some of the design inspiration and some of the materiality of the buildings on this for the participants here today.
Great, thank you, Jane. How can I share my screen just so I can point to some of the areas of the building that I'm talking about? George, could you give me control? Great, thank you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'd like to start by elaborating on the preceding remarks with respect to the overall building form. In the massing and the stepping of the building, we endeavored to break down the overall scale of the project into some smaller components to acknowledge the context in which it sits. All at once, as was discussed previously, this is an area of the city that is beginning to experience significant contemporary infill projects along its avenues, single-family dwellings directly adjacent to many of the properties, and a medley of architectural expressions along Danforth Avenue proper. This is evident in the two images on the screen. There's a heritage piece with proposed retail. Down here at the bottom, there are two heritage buildings, actually not just this white one, but just to the right, you'll see another heritage piece. There is a low-rise front entrance to the building with recessed balconies. It's located here just to the left. A stepped-back glazed facade with projecting balconies. This location here, this L shape that hovers above the existing heritage component, and another brick facade with the similar architectural expression. We believe, and that's this piece at the back that is pushed back even further. We believe that by breaking down the building into these smaller scale buildings within buildings, if you will, we allow continuity of the uniquely eclectic neighborhood streetscape along this part of Danforth Avenue. The two heritage buildings at the base over here, they form the foundation of the streetscape fabric, and they'll be incorporated into the facade. The first building on the right over here with the darker red brick and is very typical in scale and materiality with others along the stretch of the Danforth. The second building, the white building, is mid-18th century. It was originally a wood structure known as the White House Hotel. We've worked closely with heritage specialist ERA to develop a strategy to celebrate and recognize the heritage assets on the site. We hope this will result in a project that bridges the heritage features of the original buildings on site with the stylistic features of those that line the street and the surrounding area to enhance the experience at grade for both retailers and pedestrians, while also providing this distinct address from the heritage piece to the new residences. As you can see in both of these images, the materiality of the building is primarily brick masonry construction, and it employs a playful rhythm of punched windows, providing depth and texture to the elevation. That is this area here I'm talking about along the back. These shifting and distinct window schemes will serve to animate the facade with some shadow play throughout the day. In contrast to the masonry architecture, we've also employed the expanse of glazing with vertically capped and extended mullions in this location. The roof heritage piece is standing seam metal, and complementing that directly adjacent is the metallic colored soffit, which runs down the side of the building, and again under the soffit of the new entrance to the apartment building. The use of punched windows, brick masonry, metal roofing, it all responds directly to the urban fabric of that existing neighborhood, and at the same time is respectful to the cultural assets that we currently have here on the site. And I guess I could turn it back over to Jane, and we can walk through some of the streetscape perspectives.
Great, thanks, James.
You're welcome.
Before I just go to the next slide, which has some perspectives, I did want to clarify items with respect to the two buildings that we are incorporating into our proposed building design. Although we've referenced them earlier as heritage buildings, they're not provincially designated by Part 4 or Part 5 in the Ontario Heritage Act, nor are these two properties on the city's heritage inventory. They were very early on in our consultations with the city identified by city heritage staff as having potentially some cultural heritage value. So although they're at this point not required, or at the onset of our applications, I should say, be required to be maintained, we took this opportunity to use the facades as a really unique and cool feature to add into the proposed redevelopment, not only to define some of the street walls, but to use what's there, but it really give it some sort of significance on the subject property and along the strip of Danforth. So the next slide, which I believe James still has control, if you just want to flip forward in your presentation. Perfect. Are two views along Danforth Avenue. The one on the left-hand side is facing west. So you see the proposed building that would be on the north side of Danforth. In context, in terms of the existing built form further west along Danforth. So you can see the built form, the 2- and 3-story on the north side, and then on the south side, some of those taller buildings that are certainly part of Main Street Square over there where the cursor is. And then the photo on the east side is pretty much in the exact same, not photo, I should say, the high-level perspective rendering and views. It's looking in the eastern direction along Danforth as well, and you'll see in the left hand the proposed building on the north side of Danforth, and then some of the built form that's further east, both on the north and the south side of Danforth. The next page shows two other perspective views. These are more from a bird's eye perspective, looking at the project or the subject property and the proposed development from the north. So on the left-hand side, you have a view, bird's eye view facing southwest. So you're looking at sort of the north, sorry, I should say you're looking southeast, but you're looking at what's the proposed southwest portion of the building. You'll see the laneway to the north, some of the proposed entrances that we have to the back of the building for not only parking and loading, but also there's some pedestrian entrances, which would obviously be secured back there. And then on the right-hand side is the bird's eye perspective looking in the southwest direction. And again, for context, you can see the high-rise buildings from Main Street Square that are off in the distance to the southwest of the subject property. The next slide shows the site plan, or the ground floor plan, I should say, and articulates what we've proposed and the use of space on the main floor. So at the bottom right hand, the southeast portion of the building is the main commercial space. And there would be, thanks James, there would be an entrance off of Danforth Avenue into that commercial space there. One of the priorities, obviously, in an effort to keep eyes on the street and to animate Danforth, is to have that commercial right up at the property line and visible from Danforth. And that, for the most part, where we've placed the commercial, at this point we're contemplating retail, is within the existing facades at 2726 and 2732, so the most easterly properties of that compose the subject property. And then to the west of that, so along the west side of the subject property, is the main residential entrance. And you'll see that the front wall proposed for that main, the vestibule and the amenity space beyond that is set further back from the main wall of the commercial space. And this obviously gives dimension to the building. We're not just a glass wall up, but it also helps differentiate the different portions of the proposed building, the commercial from the residential, because you want to create different feels for different components of the building, especially what would be experiencing high patronage in the commercial portion versus what would be for the future tenants of this building. So behind that main residential vestibule and entryway, we have the sort of a social living room and amenity area, which would be for the future residents. And in behind those spaces, we have a series of stairwells and elevators, which would be used for the future residents. And behind the stairwells and the elevators are more of the back of house items, including what we've added is like a moving in room, a storage room, residential lockers, as well as secure and safe bike parking spaces, which can be accessed both from internally through the building, but also have an external access to the laneway for ease of bringing your bikes in and storing them, as well as some additional pedestrian access points at the northeast corner of the building, which would be, as I mentioned before, safe and secure. And then we have at the northwest portion of the building, the main ramp going down to the underground parking. And to across the north end of the site, we have our proposed Type G loading space, which would be off the laneway. And as a principle of development and design, all efforts have been made to consolidate the parking and the loading off the laneway to the rear of the building, away from the main pedestrian entrances and the main commercial entrance on that. Now, scrolling, I guess, to the right-hand side of this slide, we've shown the second floor plan, just to give an idea of how the floor plate changes when you're going from the ground floor to the second floor. The second floor, we have some internal suites proposed at the front of the building closer to Danforth Avenue. Those would be housed in both existing portions of the buildings that we're retaining, but also new portions at the southwest corner. We have some interior corridors which would be accessible to all future tenants of the building, because we've placed the outdoor amenity space at the second floor to provide some outdoor amenity in terms of terracing for all the future residents. But there is also private outdoor amenity space for a lot of the units, either by terraces at the rear or the sides or at the front of the building. And what I think is unique or I would like to point out on this second floor plan is that the bulk of the rear portion of the building has been carefully stepped back from the side lot lines. And this has been a careful consideration, not only to accommodate for distance views in terms of having windows and balconies and terraces on the east side of the building, but also to accommodate in terms of light, air circulation, flow, and to minimize some of the step back or issues you have with impact and compatibility with adjacencies. The next slide details in a similar fashion to the need for the application that we've made. We are proposing to amend the zoning bylaw. What we've come in for is with a draft amendment which would increase the FSI on the subject property as well as the height. I think there's some other small subtleties in terms of the reduction to some of the parking that's proposed and the amenity space. However, the two key points that I've highlighted here and that George has previously are really with respect to the height and density. And the reason I believe that we need to make this application not only goes into what we've proposed here, but looking at what sort of massings, what sort of designs, what sort of densities have been approved along Danforth. And that really goes into some of the explanation I was giving earlier in terms of looking at approved applications for 8 and 10 stories at densities that came in very similar at 4.35, 4.39, very similar numbers that we're coming in, albeit they have much higher GFA numbers. The density value is a much better measure in terms of how massing is situated in a lot. Now, we don't just look at what's been approved along this corridor. It's just one of the guides we use when we're developing and coming up with a planning scheme for this property. So we've made the application for a zoning bylaw amendment. We have not at this point come in with our site plan application, which as some of you may know is a much more technical document and does guide a lot of the particulars in terms of the building materiality and a lot of the other technical components and what the building is going to look like. But going to the next page, I guess a large part of the zoning bylaw application, amendment application that we come up with not only looks at what I've done for my office in terms of the planning justification report, but it's also based on a whole other series of supporting studies and drawings that come in to support the development proposal. And we've listed them all here for you today. You've heard from the architect. We do have our transportation consultant and our heritage consultant available today to answer any questions, because there has been a ton of work and a ton of background review that's gone into what we've come up with and submitted to the city. Next slide, please. In terms of status and next steps, this is very similar to the chart that George was outlining earlier in his presentation, but I've included some of our dates here to get a sense of where we've come from and where we're going. So we started out actually much earlier on this exercise. It was back in 2017 and 2018, looking at this site, even before my clients, the current owners, bought this property. We looked at the potential, the subject property, what was around there, came up with a draft scheme, and we came in to meet with the city in March of 2019. We met with staff, which included planning, urban design, heritage, transportation, and engineering, I believe. Then it took us nearly a whole year to prepare the required background studies and ensure that all our plans and drawings and our technical components, including the engineering and the transportation review, all worked together, and we had a really viable, good concept to submit. So that came in February of 2020. We had a preliminary staff report, which is very much for information purposes only, and that was prepared in March of 2020, and it was forwarded to Community Council in June for consideration, and that gave the direction actually to schedule this community open consultation meeting, which is occurring today. We have received some comments from our initial submission. I believe we have comments from planning, urban design, forestry, the school boards, some of the utilities, but we are still waiting on transportation and engineering, as well as fire and water to comment. So we're still receiving some of those. We'll also obviously be taking in comments we receive from the public tonight, as well as any written comments that come through George. We will be scheduling a series of further consultations, whether that's virtual or in person, certainly with the councillor and his office, as well as staff, not just planning staff, but urban design, urban forestry, engineering, the whole suite, to address all of the issues and comments that we have received and make a resubmission with a revised proposal that hopefully addresses all of the comments. it's we may need more than one resubmission to address all those comments, certainly as we work forward with the community and with the planning office on reshaping and revising this proposal. But what we're really is going to be working towards is a final staff report where we're all in agreement of what the proposal at this site looks like. And hopefully that final staff report will recommend approval of this application, but it does go to community council first, and then council to make a decision on whether or not that staff recommendation is upheld or not. So many more steps to come, and we're just tipping off the consultation process here, and we'll work forward on this. So that concludes our presentation. There's some of our contact information for everyone participating today virtually or reviewing the recording tomorrow or whenever that is. And I think, George, we can now go forward to the Q&A portion of tonight's agenda.
Great. Thank you, Jane and James, for that presentation. So, so there's really three different ways to participate in this meeting. And one of the ways is essentially, well, actually, first of all, let's get you guys set up so that you can actually participate. And so what you'll find at the bottom right of your screen, and I'm doing it with you guys as I'm also an attendee on this on another computer, is you'll see on the bottom right, you'll see participants, chat, and three dots, so the ellipses. So you should open up participants, you should open up chat, and you should also open up Q&A. And so now you'll see three different boxes. You'll see us, the panelists, on the right side. You'll see chat, and you'll see the Q&A. And so if you want to basically make a comment using your audio, what you would do is you would raise your hand. And you can see that just where the panelists are, just below the panelists, you see a little hand icon on the right-hand side. And if you click on that, your hand will be raised, and I will see that. And then I will call your name and unmute you, and then you can ask your question, and then I can mute you again, and then we'll answer that question or hear your comment. The other way is basically by text, and you can write out your question in Q&A, and that will be seen by the panelists. So we'll see that, and I will read that question out so that everyone can hear it, and then we'll answer it. And then the other way, if you just want to provide a comment, is to use the chat function, and that should go to everyone as well, and I should be able to read that as well. And then the final way here is that you can just email me your comments or email me your questions, and we can chat about it more there. So this really isn't your only opportunity to leave comments or questions. So those are the three ways that it can be done. So I'm seeing one question from Zazilivia Bellows, and I apologize if I didn't pronounce that right. And the question is, how many affordable units will there be? Jane, would you like to take that on?
Certainly. So at this point, the building is proposed to be rental. What that looks like in terms of what the rents will be, whether they'll be definitions of affordability under CMHC or other matrices, we have not yet confirmed that. We are hoping that the rental nature of the proposed building obviously does help with affordability in this neighborhood in terms of it's housing options. You can live here without having to buy a condo unit, but unfortunately I can't confirm the rent rates at this point, what they're going to be.
George, I can't hear you. It seems you're muted.
Thank you for that. Sorry, everyone. I'm not getting any more questions or comments, but in case someone missed the instructions, basically, there's these three. Ooh, I'm seeing one in the chat. Okay, great. So this is from Laura, and she writes, "Thank you to Jane and James for your presentation and reviewing the other development proposals. As a resident kitty corner to the north of the development, how will traffic be managed in the laneway? This laneway is quite active, servicing homeowners and businesses adjacent to the proposed building." So that's a really good question, Laura. And so before I turn it over to Tony, who's a transportation consultant for the applicant, just wanted to say that so the city would get a transportation impact study, and that would be reviewed by our transportation engineers. So you heard Jane say that we haven't gotten those comments yet, but those will be coming in. So that should review that issue. But Tony, if you want to sort of just give Laura your perspective on that, that would be appreciated.
Hi, Laura. Can you guys hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, good. Laura, thank you for your questions. And yeah, before I start answering your questions, right, I just want to point out that nothing is finalized yet. We are still working closely with city transportation staff and the project team on this project right now. We haven't received all the comments from transportation staff. So I'm glad that you asked these questions, because I know that all of you live in this area for so many years, and you guys are more familiar with this site more than any one of us. So so like I said, nothing is finalized yet, and we are still working with staff. So now back to your question. So first of all, based on the density of the subject site, right? And we do not anticipate that the site will generate a lot of traffic. And this is also in line with the City of Toronto Transportation Impact Study guideline. When the density is not that high, a full traffic impact study is not required. So in this case, the proposed development only have like 80 units or something. So it doesn't trigger the need for a full traffic impact study. And even if it does, based on the methodologies that we use, it will not generate a lot of traffic during the peak hour. And not only that, right? And the developers also propose to further reduce the parking supply for the subject site, to further encourage people to use other sustainable mode of transportation. Because as you know, the site is actually really close to the subway station, and also really close to the GO station. So as you can see, when you look at the actual proposed parking supply, the site only have 27 parking spaces. So based on that number, right, you can easily anticipate that the traffic generation for this site is going to be low, since we only have like 27 parking spaces in total. So I hope that answers your question. And yep.
Thanks, Tony, for that. So just to reiterate, transportation services from the city would review that impact and provide any commentary on that, not just on the traffic impact, but also the number of parking spaces to see if it's appropriate. And Tony's right, like you do have the main TTC station as well as the Danforth GO. So that would be a factor when Transportation Services reviews the application.
Hey, George, can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So most of the presentation, or certainly the first half, was talking about all the other applications that are underway in the area, and I guess setting the context that there's other proposals, which most of which haven't actually been approved, but pointing to those to justify this application. From a transportation impact, from a traffic impact, would you also consider the context of all the additional development that's proposed for the area and how that impacts traffic? I guess the question to Tony would be there. Well, we talked about all the other density and buildings coming to the area when we're talking about massing and height and the proposal of density. Would we also then consider that when we're talking about traffic impacts?
Yes, but not for like so how it works is like when an application or when a developers want to develop a land, you probably know, right? They will probably have a pre-consultation meeting with staff, and at that time, staff will look at the proposed development proposal and identify all the technical reports requirement. So in this case, like I understand that there are many other development proposal going on in this area, right? When let's say, for example, I remember Jane mentioned that there's another two high-rise tower like proposed in the nearby, right? When that when whoever is the traffic consultant is preparing the traffic study for that site, they will need to look at the area-wise transportation impact. And they will also need to include our site in their study. So when they prepare their technical report. But for our site, because our density is so low, and also there's no need that it doesn't trigger the need of a full traffic study at all. Like you're just talking about 27 parking spaces. It's not going to impact the nearby intersections significantly.
Yeah, but Tony, it's in the context of everything that's happening in the area. So
yes,
your
and
application
typically
is
the city
27
would also
plus all the other density that's coming online. So I just want to be very clear about that. Like, let's not
Yes.
talk about this as an isolated application that's happening out in the middle of nowhere. This is in the context of Maine and Danforth and all the additional sites and developments that have been proposed so far. So, like, that needs to be considered. It's not just 27 parking spaces. It's all of the intensification that's going to happen at the area.
I do understand that.
Very good.
Typically, an area-wise transportation study will need to be prepared. Like, for example, I know that there in this area is going through a bunch of major like changes in this area. At that time, I believe the city would hire a consultant to actually do an area-wise transportation study to understand the impact of putting in intensify the entire area. Correct me if I'm wrong, George. I believe you know that, right?
So yes and no. So, but because the city really does rely on when consultants come forward or when developers come forward with new development, that those transportation studies would be provided to support that development, which would look at the broader context. So it's just the same as looking at the broader context for height and density. It's just the same as applying it to parking is what I think Councillor Bradford's trying to get at. It's really the same thing here. And I think what he's saying is and I think what we're also hearing from various residents is to push for that study. And it may not yield much, right? Like, to go back to your point, Tony, it might just, the parking impact from this, it may not be that much, but I think that might be something that's worth investigating, and something that I see that the residents and certainly the councillor is also concerned about. So Zelia has provided another question in the Q&A, and her question is, the laneway currently is one lane. Will there be any developments in terms of making it two-way? So the official plan requires that public laneways be a certain width. And so for residential streets, that width is 5 meters. And for commercial streets, that width is generally is 6 meters. And so that's an official plan requirement. And so what that means is that when new development comes in, such as this one, they would be required to widen the laneway and provide that widening, what we call lane widening, and convey that land to the city so that we can widen the laneway. Now, the thing that's problematic about this is that it's based on a case by case basis, right? Because the development has to come in first in order for us to take the land, right? So, and so in the fullness of time, eventually we would have a wider laneway. So I'm assuming that the reason why we're asking about the laneway and the fact that it's one way versus two way may be because because there's going to be cars going through there and trucks going through there. Like, is the access wide enough to accommodate for that? And that's a really good question. And that would also get reviewed as part of the transportation side of things. And it's also, so for example, usually transportation would submit truck turning radius. So to show that the movement of the truck is actually able to be accommodated within that lane width. So that's really the idea of those studies, and that would get reviewed and either signed off on, or there would be concerns and questions and comments on that. So that's really where it comes from a laneway side. But Tony, is there anything you wanted to maybe add to this?
So my understanding is that our site is actually when you look at can somebody actually pull up the ground floor plan for me? Maybe we can share that on the screen.
George, if you give me permission, I'll pull it up.
Yep, just give me 1 second here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Tony, is that good enough?
I don't see it on my end. This is weird.
So Jane, the screen isn't being. Okay, there we go. Okay, I can see it.
Okay, as you can see, right, the access entrance to the garage, we actually push it further to the south to provide to try to widen the laneway a little bit, so that when car come in and out, there are more rooms for the car to turn. And then this is like same thing happened, right? The loading bay is there, yes, but it's going to be used infrequent for residential development. So within our site, the entire width of the laneway is going to be wider than the existing 3.666, right? So and then our client has no control over like the rest of the land, which they don't own. So within our site for the proposed development, we try to widen it as much as we could to make sure that the car can actually maneuver in and out. And we also, like Josh was saying, we also did some swipe path analysis for the loading to ensure that the truck can actually enter and exit the site without hitting anything. So I hope that answers your question as well.
Thanks, Tony, for that. So there's another question or comment from Laura that says, there are only 2 entrances to the laneway, one from Coleman Avenue and one from Dawes Road. The laneway from Coleman is 1 car width. The entrance from Dawes is now consistently blocked due to traffic, plus the parking from the medical center, and it is not wide enough at both of those entrances. So Tony, if you can respond to that, that would be great. Laura, thank you for that comment. We'll take that back for sure, and we'll let transportation know that that's a concern. Usually these laneways, the official plan does say like use the laneways. It should be for parking. It should be for access. It should be for trucks. But yes, like making sure that laneway is wide enough is important. So our transportation engineers will look at that as well, and review on whether or not it's appropriate for this development. So Tony, if there's anything else you want to add to that, feel free to.
No, I mean, I think I already answered that question previously, right? I mean, the developers try their best to widen within the site. I mean, like again, I want to emphasize that the traffic generation, trip generation for this site is going to be really low. And don't forget, we are actually removing the existing site traffic as well. So when you subtract the existing site traffic and then you add back the new traffic, the net increase is going to be like approximately 15 to 20 more vehicles along this laneway. And as you know, in this area, like majority of the people will be relying on transit to go to work, and so like even if we have 20 parking spaces here, not all 20 vehicles is going to be coming out of the parking garage at the same time. And yeah.
Thanks, Tony, for that. So we have another Q&A, or another question in the Q&A. And this one's also from Sylvia, and it says, there are properties on the other side of the laneway. Is there room to extend the laneway to the required 6 meters? So generally, it would basically come from both sides, that lane widening. Usually we would take more from the commercial side because, well, that's usually where we see most of the development occurring. But so that's really the requirement that would be needed for that lane widening in accordance with just city policies and city regulations. So that's something that the applicant has to provide. There's no way to get around that. That's really just, it's not negotiable. I've never seen a developer negotiate that. It's really just something that we need. It's an official plan requirement. You need to widen that laneway, and there is a certain width that is required depending on the width of the existing laneway. So I hope that answers that question as well. So it may not be, even after this application, may not be fully 6 meters because, again, those regulations that govern how much one property has to give. But again, it goes back to widening that laneway on a piece by piece basis, depending on when the development comes in, and then ensuring that the laneway is sufficient enough to actually allow for the parking and the loading. And just because you widen this portion of the laneway, right? There's probably other portions of the laneway that wouldn't be widened. So you have to consider the entire laneway itself from both of those entrances. So I think from Coleman and Dawes. So I hope that answers that question. And Tony, if you want to add anything, feel free to. So if people are having problems using the Q&A, which I think some might, feel free to use the chat. I'm seeing both, so I can see both of those, and I'm happy to answer either of those questions coming from either side. There's also the raise hand function as well, which is also available if you have the participants bar open. So just to reiterate, if you guys do just decide to have questions or comments after this meeting, feel free to email me. My email should be on the notice that you received in the mail. It's also available online. So at the CP, at the toronto.ca/CP consultations, my email should be there as well. So if you guys have questions or comments after the fact, that's also a way to be heard as well. So I know we covered a lot of ground here tonight, so it might be a lot to take in. So I recognize that, and happy to still take in comments and questions after the fact. And we also have, this meeting is from 8:30, and we're really just in the Q&A session. In terms of just next steps, we're going to be, so the applicant's going to be provided with all the comments that they'll receive from the city and that they'll receive from tonight, and any other comments that I get after the fact. And then they'll go out and revise their application and make another resubmission, and we'll review that again. And if everything's copacetic, then we'll just go ahead with a final report. If there are still outstanding issues, then we would go through another whole session of comments and resubmissions and revisions and until we sort of get it right. So I'm seeing another question in the Q&A, and this one's from Randolph. I see that the entrance for the bike storage is at the back as well as the garage entrance. With the increased foot, bike, and car traffic, will there be any additional security measures taken? There's crime in the alleyway as it is. Thanks for the question, Randolph. Jane or Tony, do you want to respond to that, please?
Certainly. From a planning perspective, this is actually an intentional proposal in terms of when you animate spaces or have more usage, it hopefully helps with crime because it's not, everyone doesn't turn their back on public areas. So by having high usership or additional usership in the laneway, both with bikes and some vehicles, hopefully that will help with crime. Furthermore, there's certainly additional security measures which we can put at the back of the building. I mean, I've mentioned that they would be secured, obviously, but the use of video surveillance and other technologies which would just increase or add to security on this laneway of the public realm. So.
Thanks, Jane. So the idea that Jane's trying to talk is what we call, eyes on the street, and trying to increase that as much as possible to sort of dissuade any kind of criminal activity in the laneway and try to make it more safe. So I've also got a comment here from Laura, and it's thank you to Brad to recognize there is a concern regarding all the other developments. There are quite large in size to the areas. It is all the developments and the cumulative effects that are the concern. In all the previous community meetings I have attended regarding developments, residents have consistently expressed concern around building height. For both towers and mid-rise, community has expressed that lower heights for mid-rise would be more amenable. This is the first development proposal for this block on the north side of Danforth. Okay, so that's thanks for the comment there, Laura. So just a couple of things that I kind of want to just touch on and unpack there. So the Danforth Avenue planning study that I had discussed in the presentation basically allows for building heights of 24 to 27 meters. And this building is slightly above that at 27.8 meters. So if the building was lowered to the 27 meters, then it would fit within that official plan amendment that's now approved. and so it would allow for that sort of that height. As long as it's and it would have to be, of course, be appropriately massed, which goes back to the urban design guidelines and that angular plane to the rear. And then there's also the possibility of it going to 10 stories if there's a non-residential component to it, say on the second floor. That's not what we're looking at here right now, but that is a potential that's in the policy as well. So just wanted to just recognize the policies themselves for that. But Jane, if there's or James, if you want to also respond to sort of the concerns around height, that would be helpful.
Yes, certainly. I think there's not a whole lot more to say on that in terms of trying to design a building that fits within the parameters of mid-rise mixed-use building. I know we are still exploring the opportunities for adding a second floor non-residential space. We're also looking at, we've incorporated the rear yard angular plane at the back of the building, and as well step backs at the front of the building to address, street wall and angular planes, which are prescribed from Danforth as well. In terms of sort of what's fed into our height, some of the background thinking is urban design guidelines have some ideal floor heights and built wall heights and where step backs should be. Because we're also working with existing facades and what's there, we've tried to match what's on site and what's on the adjacent sites, which have, in part contributed to where we've landed on some of the heights and, being slightly off that ultimate 27 meters. We're going to be certainly looking at that height to see, how we can meet, either go up or go down, to meet the city's policies. But really, to make a mid-rise building work, you have to have a lot of components. And I know they are more expensive to build because of the stepping back at the rear and the angular plane. Not that that's a consideration, I should say, at all in terms of our planning and what feeds into our urban design. But at the 27 meters, as George mentioned, is really a target height. We're coming in with what the official plan amendment 420 is, and the Main Street study is really trying to encourage and promote in terms of intensification along this corridor in close proximity to higher order transit stations.
Thanks, Jane. Laura, I hope that answered your question. I gave you a little bit more understanding of the height and the things that we are going to be looking into. Not saying anything new right now, so feel free to leave your comments. And so Laura just left a message saying, yes, thank you. It's been a very good presentation. So I'm glad it was helpful, Laura. Thank you. So again, we're here till about 8:30. So if you have any questions or comments, just please use the chat function, or if it's working for the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask your questions through that way as well. Okay, so it's 10 minutes to 8:30, where we'll close up for this meeting. I haven't seen any new questions or comments, so I'm just gonna again just reiterate what we had talked about in terms of the next steps. So the next steps will be the applicant has gotten all the comments, or will still be receiving comments from the city, especially from our what we used to call our technical services, so our engineering staff, our transportation staff, fire services, and Toronto Water. And they'll take those comments and the rest of the comments they've received from the city and from the residents as well, like from this meeting and from any other communication that I get by email. And they'll revise their application to address those comments and then make a resubmission, and that'll be reviewed again to make sure that the proposal meets good planning. And then if it does meet good planning, then we'll go ahead with the Toronto East Community Council with the final report. Councillor, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You can totally decline this, but if you have any closing remarks, feel free to do so.
No, very quick. Just want to thank folks for their participation. Those questions were really thoughtful. And, again, it's important that people who are doing work on the site and doing the studies actually come out to the area because, the context is really important. It's not just about the number of parking stalls, the way people use the laneway in and out, all of those real world considerations. Certainly a warrant a visit and a study of the area. And it does need to be considered in the context of everything that's happening along that stretch of Danforth. So it's an interesting application. I'm glad everyone got a chance to see it tonight, and fully appreciate if folks want to digest that and send their comments, their feedback directly to myself and George Pentazis at City Planning. So thanks for having us on tonight, George.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Thanks everyone for attending. It's not yet 8:30, so I'm still going to stay on the line in case there's any other questions or comments. But thank you for your patience through basically this virtual community consultation meeting. I know it's very different from what we usually do, and I definitely prefer more of the in-person. So I can see people's faces and gauge their expressions, but given the circumstances, I think this went pretty well. So if there's nothing else from anybody, you're free to leave the meeting if you like. But if you do, my only parting remarks are stay safe, wear a mask, and wash your hands. And that's really it from me. So again, we'll be on here till 8:30 when we'll close the meeting. So thanks everybody. And also this meeting is being recorded. And that recording should be available online. I'd like to say it would be available tomorrow, but the way things usually are with the city, they can take a little bit longer. So my best efforts will be to try to get it up by next week. So look out for that. And if you're just looking for it, email me. I can send you a copy of it. Thanks, everyone. So we're coming up to 8:30. So thanks everyone for attending tonight. And again, email me if you have any questions or comments that are in addition to what was presented tonight. So thanks everybody, and have a good night.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks, George. Thanks all.